I'm going to talk to you about ruler. I'm going to do a little bit of a, very short sort of preamble about the relevance of ruler within the situation we're in now. And then I'm going to dive straight into the kind of what and the how and the why of ruler, and then talk a little bit about the evidence and how you can use it in your school. So if I just start, I think, and apologies for the noise, you've got an SCN group they're supposed to be doing mindfulness upstairs. It doesn't sound very mindful, but that's what apparently they're doing, jumping up and down. So I have talked about, I suppose to begin with, recovery from what? When we talk about the recovery curriculum. And I know that within the rooms, this was something that was raised, particularly in our room, about do we need to do a recovery curriculum, and if so, what might it look like? And I read a really interesting article, which I will put in the chat at the end, from Barry Carpenter, which was a bit dramatic, but it does sort of highlight what the losses are, I suppose. And you can see that I sort of captured them there in a sort of too long didn't read version. And I think the first one for me, the bits that I think are really important for children of all ages and for adults, is around the loss of social interaction and what that then means for children when they return to school, and young people when they return to school, adults when they return to school, how to manage their emotions and cope with situations that they may not have had to cope with for a while. And there, I think the other one that's quite important there is around the loss of freedom, and that's particularly important for adolescents who will be emerging in their adult self, and a lot of that is really tested within the dynamics of a peer group. So they're the two really that I think are probably most important to what I'm going to be talking to you about. Now, does this then, I suppose the question is, can I do the logic and say these are the losses, therefore these are the outputs? And I think, as some of the speakers have said already, well, no, not necessarily, but there will be a spectrum upon which some children skip into school, they remember everything, all of those kind of skills and the knowledge around how to be a good friend, how to cope and how to learn in a group setting, how to manage conflict, all kind of comes back. They had a sort of a good to really pleasant experience at home learning, and therefore you might argue it's not necessary, but there will be a spectrum, and there will be some children for whom the experience of being at home has been quite unpleasant, or they have really struggled with those losses that we talked about, particularly the loss of social interaction with peers. Now, that will possibly create different levels of maybe anxiety. Definitely, I think for some 16 and 18-year-olds, there has been a sense of real loss around not taking examinations. But I do think for all children, they will be processing how the adults around them at home have responded to the pandemic and the losses that those adults have felt. So I suppose just putting it out there, I think from my perspective, there is probably a spectrum there to look at, and how does ruler fit into all of that then? So I think regardless of whether you are an unwarranted optimist or you are yourself very anxious about how children are going to come back, I think ruler is going to be your friend in this situation. So thinking about what a recovery curriculum for pastoral care might look like, and I have tried to sort of assimilate what the various research and evidence sort of says into four handy areas of thinking. The first one, which I think schools do brilliantly, and I shall say no more on than that, is belonging, and each school does it in their own way, and the act of belonging in itself is amazing for pupil well-being. What I am going to be talking to you about are the next three. So emotional literacy, which only when that is secure leads into a person being able to self-regulate their emotions. And then what are the ideas, the frameworks, the strategies that you can also introduce explicitly in your school to help children and adults cope better, and should we cope with a similar or different situation moving forward. So that's the idea of resilience and being able to adapt really quickly. So to do that, I'm going to take you through a case study, which is Charles Dickens Primary School, and talk you through how ruler works as a whole school, whole child, whole staff approach, and is useful and relevant to everybody, not just those children or adults who may be feeling less secure, less well, or maybe exhibiting some of the characteristics of mental ill health. So Charles Dickens, for those of you who I'm quite sure do not know, is a large primary school in central London. We have just under 500 children, and it is a school with, if I just go back to that one, it is a school where, when we started thinking about emotional intelligence and well-being, we had really strong reactive things in place for children and adults when they were struggling, when they had moments of crisis, moments of change. But we didn't feel that those moments, those numbers of people who needed our help were going down. It felt like a bit of a sort of slog, really. And we still had, for many years, despite children behaving really well in the classrooms, it was never really about that. It really felt like that it was never ending, that families' needs, children's needs were sort of continuing, and we weren't ever really getting on top of it. We had a part-time ed psych, mentors, we had various opportunities for pupil leadership. So we were looking for something that was going to be a game changer for us, something that was about lifting the quality of mental health and well-being for everybody in the school, rather than sort of working on an individual or group basis. So that's where this came from. And we discovered Ruler in a kind of weird way through New Scientist. I don't know if any of you read the New Scientist, but there was an article in the New Scientist which talked about the fact that there was this ruler approach. It was used across the States in hundreds of thousands of schools. It's also used in Australia and a little bit in New Zealand. That it had, which was the bit for me, the bit that made me want to go, ooh, it had 25 years worth of research, including longitudinal studies that said that those children who took part in a ruler school or went to a ruler school and really experienced the approach in their primary and secondary years actually did better in terms of public examinations, but more importantly for me, they were less likely to commit a crime, they were likely to earn more money, and less likely to die at an early age. So that's a really sort of powerful sort of group of evidence, really, that made us think, actually, what is this? But it wasn't in the UK, which made it quite difficult to find out more. So we got some funding via the NHS to go to Yale, which is where Ruler started, and to be trained by Mark Brackett. Here's Mark, who developed Ruler, and he's a professor based at Yale University. And at Yale, they have something called the Centre for Emotional Intelligence, where they have been exploring what makes an emotionally intelligent person over a long period of time. They developed that into a set of tools, which Mark leads, and as you can see, there has recently written a book about it as well. So you can find out quite a lot instantly by, I'll come to it in a second, by just Googling Yale and Centre for Emotional Intelligence, or even just Googling Ruler approach, if by the end of my slides you feel actually you'd like to explore a bit by yourself. So that's the starting point. So this really big, quite powerful program, very well known in the States, but not here at all. We went to find out more. We went to be trained in a trainer model and bring it back here. So you're probably, well, I hope you're all now thinking, what is ruler? So ruler is an acronym, and it stands for the following. It stands for recognizing, first of all, and that's the first step really, recognizing your emotions in yourself and others. So moving beyond a quite simplistic understanding that very little children have about feeling happy or sad or angry, to understanding that there is a complexity of emotions and quite nuanced emotions in yourself and indeed in other people. The next step then is the you, so the understanding, so knowing why you feel the way you feel, but also knowing how your emotions can impact on others and what that means for others and how they feel. The next step is being able to label those emotions very, very accurately. So the children at Charles Dickens, by the time they reach year 6, have hundreds of words that they can use really confidently and really well to describe how they feel at any particular point and why they feel the way they feel. So then the E and the R are really about expressing those emotions appropriately. So that's about using your words, as you would say in primary. So being able to articulate yourself and talk about what you feel, why you feel it, and in a tone that allows others to support and understand you. And then the final bit, which is the sort of the end of the rainbow bit, really, that has taken quite a bit of time for us to get to, is being able to regulate your emotions. And here we mean, I might feel angry or upset or anxious in any particular moment, but I'd like to feel something more pleasant. And so learning how to get from how you feel to a more pleasant state. So that's the rule of it, that's the acronym. And there are, alongside the acronym, then there are just a simple range of tools, which I'm going to share with you now, that help children and young people, and indeed adults, because the starting point for ruler is training adults to be able to achieve the full ruler of ruler. So let's look at the first one. I'll come back to that, skip that, and I'll go back to that one as well. So the first tool is the charter. So you might be looking at this and thinking, oh yes, Cassie, they look like rules that you might have in a school or college. We all agree, we all sign it, and it lasts till about November. But this is different. This is a charter that's based on emotions. So you can see here that and this is an American one, so apologies, that the staff and teachers in a particular class want to feel these things. They decide what they want to feel, and therefore the behaviours are linked to the feelings that everybody wants to feel, and they also agree a set of strategies that they are going to use as a class. Now, depending on the age of the children and the level of literacy, this can become as simple and complex as possible. We also have one at Charles Dickens as a staff team as well, that we all sign in terms of how we want to feel and what we're going to do in points of conflict or challenge. So that's the first tool, and that really, I suppose you could argue, is the belonging part of the recovery curriculum. So really setting out these are the pleasant emotions and getting everyone to get on board with it. Now, this is probably the most well-known tool. This is called the mood meter, and you may have seen sort of various iterations of this in terms of colours for emotions. There are books that use colours for emotions, but what's great about this is, and this is a simple one, they become more and more complex, is it really breaks down feelings into two axes. So along your horizontal axes, you have pleasantness. So as you move to the right, you can see that the emotions become more pleasant. And you can see as you move to the left that the emotions become less pleasant. The vertical axis is the level of energy attached to those emotions. So as you move up, the emotions become more energetic, and as you move down, the emotions become less energetic. So you've got level of energy, and level of emotion. And what we teach the children is there is no wrong emotion to feel at any one point, because emotions are not something that are sort of right or wrong. They're a response, but it's how you then regulate yourself within that a situation where you may be feeling fuming or livid, and how you articulate how you're feeling, and hopefully you don't want to feel fuming or livid, and how you get to a more pleasant place. So that's the second tool, and quite a bit of time is spent with primary age children, really teaching them what each of these different emotions are and how to recognize them in themselves. So how to recognize the difference between feeling worried and feeling sad, feeling let's say a little bit glum or ashamed and angry, and shame and anger often do get jumbled up for younger children. So that's ruler tool number 2. Ruler tool number 3 is what's called a meta moment, and kind of crucial if you want children to manage their emotions when they're not with you, probably more than when they are with you, although equally this applies to adults. So a meta moment, the tool is something happens, you have to really understand, well, the first thing is you have to stop and really understand what you're feeling, and then remind yourself, and we do quite a lot of work with adults and children on what does your best self look like. So once you've articulated, actually I feel very anxious, I'm really, really worried about this, and I know I feel anxious because of all of these feelings in my body, I'm now just going to take a moment and remind myself what my best version of me would do in this situation. And then I'm going to pull on a range of strategies to think, okay, how can I feel more calm and less anxious, because my best self is always calm. So you put in place your strategies, and some people have got loads, some people have got a couple of things, and then you are successful. So you can see this is a tool that takes many, many years, and probably as adults, not many of us have cracked it in every situation, but a really powerful tool. And then what ruler doesn't do is, because it's not prescriptive, is it doesn't really tell you what strategies you can use. So this is whereas schools, you then think, well, actually, what do we know works? And we have pulled upon Action for Happiness, who are a great organization, and they do something called 50 Ways to Feel Happy, which is based on the 10 keys of happiness for adults. And this is about long-term happiness. So not just breathing, counting to 10, taking a moment, stepping outside of a room, but actually what are the things that make the difference over time. And you can see there that, again, based on long-term research, that there are a number of things that make a real difference. One of them is trying out new things, having relationships. You can see that number 10, which I think is really important, that sense of meaning in one's life. So feeling part of a bigger picture and knowing that you are adding value to the world. So they are taught alongside the work on happiness. There are also those strategies that we teach in the moment. So this is a great one and familiar to people if you have experience of therapies, particularly around cognitive behavioral therapies, is the tool of scaling. So this is where we would say to an adult or a child, how big is your problem? So if your problem at the moment, have a think about it, is it a really big problem? So is it going to last forever? Is it a complete catastrophe? And we'd give an example of that, a car crash, somebody being very ill, for example, or actually, if it's not a big problem, then maybe it's small. It could go away in a couple of minutes. It's not going to last forever. It's a little thing that's happened maybe in your playtime or your break, and then we get the person to scale it. So to stop it from being a complete disaster, to scale it back down, because once you've got a sense of how big that problem is, then you can choose the right strategy. Smiling Mind is there as well, because that's a great and free Australian website which is around mindfulness. Lots of strategies on there to help children and adults in the moment. So that's another tool that we use. And then the fourth tool is something called the blueprint. And I really like this one. I think if you are a school that doesn't like restorative justice, then this is something you should explore. It starts off feeling the same as restorative justice in that when a situation happens where I'm feeling a certain way because of somebody else, or they're feeling a certain way because of me, we take time with the person who's maybe inflicted the negative emotion, and we talk about how they feel and get them to talk about the other person. So how did the other person feel, and get them to focus on the feelings and the expression of the feelings of the other person, as well as yourself, to think actually what could you then have done better in that situation. So that's a way that we now manage where children, young people make mistakes with their behavior. And this is the toolkit that we use, the tool that we use to help them learn how to improve moving forwards. So as Laura said, we are a research school, and I think it would be safe to say that we wouldn't be looking at ruler, and we wouldn't have ruler embedded across the school if it didn't fit in with what the EEF says. And if you head to the EEF website, you won't find ruler there yet, but what you will find is a brilliant guidance report on social and emotional learning in schools. And what that guidance report does, if I summarize across the side there, you can see, is it says what makes the difference. So we know that social and emotional learning, this is particularly primary schools, makes a difference to academic learning, and it's fairly secure. However, these are the ingredients that you need to have, and the top one, really important, is the teaching explicitly of social and emotional skills. The idea of having something almost like a maths curriculum, which is sequenced over time, embedded across the school, taught coherently and consistently, and implemented really carefully. So the ruler work fits perfectly. We can tick all of those bullets. But what we don't have on the EF website yet are the evidence framework within the UK. So that made us go and look at, well, where is the evidence then? And if you head across to the American equivalent of the EF, it's a website called CASEL. If I just take you back, you can see that within CASEL, so again, casel.org is the website, the American equivalent of the EEF. They have done a systematic evaluation of social and emotional programs, including ruler, looking at it over time. And what they found, if I then take you up to their findings, they found the following. So they found, as you can see, that students were less likely to bully. They were more likely, as they reported in both surveys and case studies, to have better relationships. But the key one for CASEL is they were more likely to have a better academic performance. And that's over time, not just whilst they were in the school where ruler was happening. So that's the research. And as Laura said, we have put in an application which I'm hoping will come through really shortly to roll out ruler as a research program across the UK with the EEF to test this framework within UK schools. So if I just move back then to how to make it work. So we took a sort of slowly approach to this. And what we realized when we embarked on ruler in 2016, 15, is that our staff actually needed lots of support and training on both their own emotional intelligence using those sort of ruler framework, and also how to teach it explicitly. So we started by using an action research approach where we introduced ruler plus anything else which had a decent evidence base, and we asked teachers to pick one and use that for 2 terms and then feedback on what they discovered. And what we found through that approach is that actually ruler and the outcomes linked to ruler far exceeded those linked to mindfulness or social stories or peer massage or all of the other approaches that could be possible to introduce, which made the whole school rollout of ruler really easy. And you can see there that we had sort of low stakes observations, team teaching, so that we could get it right, because interestingly, unlike maths or history or even SRE, people really worry about teaching social and emotional learning in their classroom in a way that I think I hadn't really predicted. So what were the barriers? And these may be the barriers that indeed you might be thinking of. The first was around inconsistency of teaching of it. And we solved that, which I'll share with you in a minute, by creating quite a detailed curriculum, because ruler is not a curriculum, it's an approach. It's open source, so you can take it now if you like. But it doesn't provide a scheme of work. So we developed that ourselves, including booklets that I'll show you, so that people didn't have to think what that would look like in their classroom. The timetabling one was a real problem, because timetables, regardless of the phase of children that you're teaching, are always a nightmare. So what we said is you just teach it when you can. So you teach it in 5 minutes, 2 minute, 10-minute chunks through the week, in those little slots where you may have a little bit of gained time. And actually we found that allowed teachers to move through a scheme of work much faster than asking them to teach in a sort of half an hour slot per week. And then the final one is workload. And I'm a great believer, if you give someone something to do, you have to take something away. So we wanted to make this work, hence why we provided all of the tools to be able to do it, so that people could pick it up and go in the moment, rather than having to add to their planning and preparation time. So they were the barriers, but I feel we got over them. And so what next? So Kate has talked a lot about being agile and pivoting, and how you can share in this new world. So as I said, we've thought about and are working with the EF on a whole approach to rolling this out as a research project. But what can I do in the meantime that allows all of you to get involved? And my answer is that we are launching something called the Wellbeing School coming soon, which has all of our animated lessons on it and free and available, and curriculum resources. And it will also have on it as well. So these are the animated lessons, and we produce these already, and they're all on YouTube, explaining each of the emotions in detail, and how you can support getting to a more pleasant or a less energetic or more energetic state. So they're all kind of available on the school website, but I'm going to pull them all into this new place, this new Wellbeing School. And then we're also going to make our booklets available, so that schools can use our curriculum, print them, download them, and use them in the schools. And hopefully that will help schools who want to use ruler overcome some of the barriers that we faced in our primary school. So you're probably thinking, well, she said it was a case study and she's not actually told us what happened. So this is what happened, and it was quite dramatic actually. Our CAMS referrals went down to, well, we had about over 30 a year, to last year we had 2. This year we've had 1, and each of those have been accepted with waiting times dropped dramatically, and partly because I think the quality of our writing and our ability to be able to write about children has also gone up. Pupil voice has shown that children had strategies and they're able to articulate what they can do in a way that they weren't able to do before. We rarely use the group interventions that we were using before. We have reduced our EP time, so our EdPsych time, from 1 day a week to once a month, and she's able to focus now more on academic barriers to learning and children with quite complex special needs, as opposed to focusing on behaviours and mental health, which is what we were using her for before. We talk a lot about mental health, so it's no longer a taboo. Parents talk about it, adults talk about it, teachers talk about it, which means that we can intervene much earlier. And then the final thing is around behaviour, which, as our Ofsted report says, is very strong, but also has noticeably improved alongside us as a school becoming much more relaxed about it. So this is about pupils self-regulating as opposed to being told how to behave. So that's been quite staggering, really, as an outcome, and great to be able to have that if we want to develop young people for the future. So they're the outcomes. This is my new email address. So if you have any questions, you can email me, but equally you can follow me on Twitter and send me a message there if that is easier.